Well, Mark Carney has just given his speech sort of setting up and framing his budget that will be coming out in a couple of weeks. A budget that is, by all accounts, supposed to be very, very large, larger than previously expected, a large deficit. I'm going to go over all of the main points here in rapid fire so you can get an idea of what was said. In short, there was a lot of harkening back to election promises and talking about what he's done so far, and most of this was about positioning. You'll understand what I'm talking about in just a second. He starts off by saying the future is in the balance. At moments like this, we need to be bold. It seems like he's trying to convince Canadians, specifically Canadian students who he was talking to at this press conference event, talking to Canadian students in Ottawa, I believe, trying to convince them that it's a good idea to do this spending and that it will be in their best interests because, of course, all of this spending will mostly, with the impact of it, be borne by future generations. So important that he targets this demographic. He blames the U.S. largely for the changing trade order. Of course, Donald Trump being a transformative president, in Mark Carney's words, a lot has changed, but he says the world is a more divided and dangerous place, something that has been common in the way that he talks to the public. He says this is a rupture and our economic strategy needs to change dramatically. Your future is not going to be the same as Mark Carney's past, he says. He talks about this period of liberalization after the Berlin Wall fell and how everyone was optimistic and hopeful and there was promise. And this helped Canada grow. It was in Canada's favor to be so closely allied with the U.S. He says that this is not the same anymore. He says that businesses are holding back investments because of the unpredictability of the U.S. Again, a lot of this framing like, well, we're in this situation, it's been triggered by the U.S., but he does say we need to take care of it ourselves. Now we'll get into how he's planning to take care of this. He talks about some of the things that are so different today than they were in the past. He used to be just like these kids he was talking to during the start of the internet, the World Wide Web, he called it. But he says, now you are dealing with something different with all these new technologies. You're dealing with these echo chambers and online squares that are polarizing and what makes it tough to tell the truth from the reality. Now, I think that is 100% true. It's incredibly challenging in any case to find out what is the legitimate truth and what is not between the way that people post on social media in extremely biased fashions versus the way that the corporate mainstream media will talk also in favor of the things that benefit their interests. It's so hard for young people and people all around to parse through that to figure out what actually is true. I feel like people are living in different kinds of realities. So at least that point rang true for me. He did say some stuff that felt to me a little bit infantilizing, saying, we are going to give your future back to you. If you trust us with this major investment, we're giving your future back to you. We've got a lot going for us. We're going to make sure that your future is all good. Now, this gets into the big conversation of larger government versus smaller government. To me, this sounds like he's saying, you have to trust us, the government, to look out for you. We're going to make sure that your future is better. In my eyes, I think it's always best for you to look out for yourself more so than trust that any government is going to make your life better for you, be it liberal, conservative, NDP, what have you. I think that you got to look after yourself and your family as your primary goal and not so much depend on things changing all that much as the result of government policy. So that was a little bit frustrating to hear, at least from my perspective. Let me know what you think about that. But he seemed to break this up all into 4 different categories. Protection. We need to spend for protection. We need to build, and we need to empower. Or rather, 3 different categories. Protection, building, and empowering. This is what he was saying. He started by saying, we need to take big, bold risks. It's time to swing for the fences again. He even used the old saying of fortune favors the bold. When I heard that first, I thought of the gambling ad, but maybe that's just because I watch too much hockey and I just see Bet365 ads over and over and over again. My God. But I heard that and thought, okay, that's interesting. He talks, now's the time to take big, bold risks. I found this to be a very interesting point because, yes, it seems like the government will be taking some big risks, some big investments that they'll be spending tens, if not hundreds of billions on over the next decade, at the very least over the next few years. We talk about the positive side of what these investments could do for Canada, but I think it's very important to talk about also the risks, right? With any investment, with any risk that you take, there's the chance that it could pay off, the chance that it couldn't. And I think that any analysis of these different spending ideas is a little bit not complete if you don't simultaneously take a look at, okay, well, what is the downside of this? But let's get into these three categories. Protection. He talks first about needing a safe community. We need to make safe communities in Canada so that people can put down roots. And then he talks about how, in his eyes, he's already been doing this with the Border Act, new legislation against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, stricter bail and sentencing to come. He says there will be more legislation on that. We're going to hire more CBSA agents. A lot of re-announcements of previous things that he had announced shortly after becoming prime minister, sort of rehashed here into saying, hey, we are protecting you. There's been a lot of criticism about soft on crime policies from a lot of people who think that there should be harsher sentencing and harsher bail reform. You can think of that what you will. He says that that's coming in the future, but there's been a lot of frustration around that so far. He says also on protection, one of the biggest areas of spending is going to be on defense spending, the biggest defense spending increase in generations, focusing on partnerships with Europe. But he doesn't point out that this spending likely will, in the short term, mostly go to the U.S. economy. This is the largest military economy in the world. And as we need to hit higher and higher amounts of spending, projected to be around $60 billion in this fiscal year, it's hard to imagine that we'll be able to build the military industry in Canada so that all of this funnels into Canada, Canadian jobs, Canadian people having better lives as a result of military expansionism. I'm not so sure that that will happen in the short term. He then goes on to talk about building, the next major thing. Again, talking about what we've done so far, the fast tracking of nation building projects. They've opened this National Projects Office and they've announced 10 or so projects that will be focused on some critical minerals, some energy grid, some additional mines, other projects like this. Now, I'm all for more investment in Canada and harnessing of our natural resources, especially to the extent that it helps out Canadians and Canadian people, helps out their the development of more jobs, higher salaries. But there is some frustration around this legislation because there's no clarity around how these individual projects were selected. Now, you'll hear a lot of people throwing out accusations about, okay, well, does the prime minister or do the people who are making these decisions have any kind of financial stake or relationship with the people who are in these positions to have these projects where they will likely get large federal funding? Now, I think we need extreme transparency from the Carney government because otherwise you're going to get legitimate criticism. If people don't have clarity on how this is all chosen, then you have to assume that people are going to assume the worst if you don't tell them, you give them evidence otherwise. I think that's fair for people to be curious about. Now, they also talk about building in terms of housing, saying we're going to build millions of new units and how Build Canada Homes is going to be a big part of this. Now, one interesting point to note here is that with these millions of new units, this isn't specifically talking about homes for you to own, but largely a non-market housing, which I think is a good thing to put money towards. I think that there's certainly a need for people to have alternatives, some sort of social housing, or for people who are unhoused to sort of help out with that as a transitory setup for people to flow through, get back on their feet, get reintegrated into society. I think all of that is a good and just thing. But I think when people talk about the housing crisis in Canada, they're largely talking about an ownership crisis. To me, I think the biggest issue in Canada is wealth disparity between the ownership class of people and people who are not able to reach that. We've seen all kinds of policies that tend to increase the wealth of people who are already wealthy through monetary expansionism. We've seen asset prices balloon throughout the pandemic. House prices go up, asset prices go up. People who own stocks, businesses, precious metals, all types of these things, real estate, their wealth has gone up dramatically over the previous years. I think that's the main issue on housing is a lot of this economic policy that's a little bit more in the weeds, but we don't really hear talk about that. Instead, we hear talk about more non-market housing. Will this really help people when it comes to the housing crisis? I'm not so certain because there, again, in my view, is not a conversation about, well, how did we get here? How can we avoid that in the future? And in my eyes, some of the risk of this spending, which again, the risk wasn't talked about in a lot of depth, some of the risk of this spending is increasing the likelihood that in the future we could have a similar situation where we see again the wealthy get wealthier and the poor get left behind as asset prices balloon if we have issues with our debt in the future. I only see a world where central banks would step in to keep the economy afloat, which to me sounds more like asset price inflation, the wealthy getting wealthier, the division of these different classes. This is the way that I view the world. Let me know where you think I'm wrong and where you think I'm totally off base. I very well could be. Don't claim to be an expert, but just sharing with you how I view the world right now. He says we need to build in today's global economy. We need to build sustainably. It's an economic imperative to build sustainably, environmentally sustainably. This is a lot of what he talks about here. That's an interesting one because he makes this argument that we need to build with the environment at top of mind. This is largely something that he's been pushing on the global stage, right? With a lot of the alliances that he's built with banks, saying we're only going to finance projects that are meeting certain green standards. Now, in some cases, there has been a greenwashing where companies will say, "Hey, look how green we are. We'll get all these pools of money in from these banks and make a whole bunch of money on this at the same time." I think it's a noble cause to try to do things as efficiently as possible, but also, I mean, lifting more people out of poverty and building by all means necessary, I think could have better human outcomes, better outcomes for humans, at least in the next 20 to 50 years. And I think that that's where we really need to focus, getting people off of the streets, getting people into houses, and doing that in a cheap and affordable and quick way. And if that isn't entirely environmentally friendly, well, I think there's a conversation there to strike a middle ground. He does make a point here about military spending largely going to the US. I was happy to see that, an acknowledgement of that. But he says that now Canada is going to be its own best customer. We are going to buy Canadian as a Canadian government. We're going to source contracts only for Canadian companies for all of these new industries that we're trying to build. The government is going to be your best customer is the framing here. This is something we've talked about on the channel a lot. Subscribe, by the way, if you haven't already done so. Is this idea that the government is becoming more of the economy, taking a step in that direction? Certainly not all the way, but becoming more of the economy where, okay, our industries are struggling. We as the government will take on debt so that we can then support those companies, buy from those companies, and hope in the future they'll become more profitable. What do you think will happen in the long term when it comes to that? We've certainly seen successful examples of it. There's some arguments that say a lot of the Made in China 2025 policy has been largely that, the government funneling a lot of money into developing their industries. And now some of them are standing on their own 2 feet, but who knows how that's going to play out over the long term. He talks a lot about doing this now and spending less as a government so that we can invest more. Another campaign promise. The idea of splitting the spending up into 2 different categories, the operational side, government salaries, day-to-day expenses, as well as capital spending, that's investment. He says that we should look at these 2 things differently. This is a large subject of debate amongst people who are familiar with the subject. His new fiscal anchor is that we will bring into balance the budget, the operational budget, within the next 3 years. This is his promise. This is the new fiscal anchor, is that this small portion of the government spending will be brought into balance over the next 3 years, while the capital expenditures will admittedly grow dramatically. We're going to invest in Canada. This is the framing of the idea here. Who knows if it'll work out long term, but I'm a little bit skeptical about this balancing of the operational budget. I think likely they will do it and do it successfully, but is that entirely meaningful for the outcomes for average Canadians? I'm all for efficiency, but is it a drop in the bucket amongst large capital spending? That's what I'm wondering. Now, he gets into some things that Canadians might not want to hear. He says, even with these efficiencies, we'll have to do less of some things we want to do so that we can do more of what we must do. I'll say that again. He put emphasis on that. We'll have to do less of some things we want to do so that we can do more of what we must do. Now, that's a great sounding quote. It sounds smart, but he didn't really elaborate on it. So I'm not exactly certain what he's talking about, these things that we want to do, but we won't be able to, or do so that we can do more of what we must do. What are you saying we must do? There wasn't a ton of clarity there. A dramatic quote, though, a dramatic quote. Another dramatic quote is that he said, I'm going to be straight with you. I'm going to tell you about all of the challenges that we're going to face over these next years. He says this will take some sacrifices. Some sacrifices, sure, in the government, but some sacrifices from average Canadians. We won't be able to flip our economy around in the short term. It will take some time. This is what he's saying. Now, I don't know that many Canadians are going to be all that happy to hear about sacrifices that they're going to have to take. I think that they're I think I've heard from a lot of people that I talk to that say, I just want to have the ability to do what I need to do for my family. If the government can help in terms of making life more affordable, then that's fine. But a lot of people have this sense that there's too much government in their lives and would like a lot of this to be less decided by the government, less central planning, and more of a step back so that people in markets can do what they do. Now, I don't know if I agree with that in all cases, but that is what I'm hearing from a lot of people. He says, we'll bet on Canada, but we'll give you control. He asks these students to get involved. He once again says, fortune favors the bold. I think of a bad parlay from a week ago, and I hear that. The hinge of fate will turn on how Canada acts right now. We are Canada strong. This is, again, hearkening back to his campaign. A lot of stuff going back to this campaign, which admittedly he won the election, was successful for him. So I can understand why you're shifting back to this. Will the U.S. criticism land in the same way? Will the Canadian patriotism land in the same way? Will the trust in him to get the job done land in the same way? That all remains to be seen. If you're listening in on the live stream, we've got more analysis coming, reactions from other politicians as they come up, and some chat here. But if you're just watching the video, that's it for this one. I'll catch you next time. I hope this video was helpful, at least a little bit. I'll see you next time. I forgot my outro there for a second.